Good morning, Vietnam!
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family.
Here's Johnny!
Whoa, this is heavy. I'm not even supposed to be here today.
Working on my day off.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Showtime with Roman podcast, the not-so-feature-length podcast where I, your host, Roman Urbisi, talks about the latest in movie news, trailers, and then rounds out the show with a discussion topic. So it's going to be another really good episode here today on the Showtime with Roman podcast. I feel like we're still in the earliest stages. It's the 20th episode. Thank you for listening if you have been so consistently, and keep on just commenting on the videos, liking and sharing, subscribing. It means a lot. I do it for you guys more so than for myself, because I like to be a voice out there in the internet space that is able to have discussions with you guys and be able to open up gateways into talking about films as a community rather than arguing about films as a community. So today we have a lot of really spicy stuff going on. We have a lot of cinematic universes to talk about, of which our discussion topic will be centered around, and then we have a couple trailers, one that is from a certain Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then we have a big news topic regarding the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then that'll be it for today. But it's going to be a very spicy episode, a very fun episode. Not sure if full rant mode would be engaged, but let's just have some fun. So, trailer talk. Mary Poppins Returns, directed by Gary Marshall, director of Chicago and Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, is directing. Was a good trailer. I don't have this personal attachment to the original. I will definitely be rewatching it in preparation for Mary Poppins Returns. Emily Blunt is amazing. I love her and everything. And Gary Marshall concerns me a bit. Some of the movie, it did have these cool animation sequences that I actually genuinely enjoyed. But a lot of the movie just looks very similar just to what a lot of these Disney movies are doing. Just very been there, done that thematically and what they're trying to tap into. And Gary Marshall is one of those guys that's worked with Disney before, that is just one of these Disney guys that comes in and is able to just create a product that, is like, oh, here's, we're just banking on these older films, or just remaking or continuing older films. It's very strange what's going on over at Disney. So that's my thoughts on that. And then we have the most interesting trailer of the week, Apostle, directed by Gareth Evans, starring Dan Stevens. Gareth Evans directed the Raid franchise. I've only actually seen the Raid 2. I haven't seen the Raid 1. And the Raid 2 is one of the best action films ever made. And this movie looks bananas. My biggest concern is that it is picked up by Netflix. Now, if the movie is produced by Netflix, generally I'd be more concerned, but I still believe it was made by someone else, and then Netflix bought the rights to it to release the product. So if that's the case, if that's what I read is true, then that's exciting, because the movie looks like this crazy, insane action film with lots of blood, guts, violence. It looks just like any other Gareth Evans Raid film, but with a little bit more of a cult aspect going on. A lot of these cult films coming out from Netflix. So Apostle looks great. I'm very excited to check it out. October 12th is when it releases, and that is a busy weekend. You've got Apostle, you've got First Man in IMAX, you've got The Bad Times at the El Royale, which also looks fantastic. So October's going to be busy, and the next couple months are going to be really hectic. A lot of movies coming out, a lot of reviews, a lot of podcasting. So Apostle's going to kick that off. So Next up, Captain Marvel, directed by Ryan Fleck and Anna Boden, who directed Mississippi Grind and Half Nelson, starring Brie Larson and Jude Law, and Samuel L. Jackson, young Samuel L. Jackson, with technology done to his face to make him look about 20 years younger, and he certainly does. The trailer, it's just a teaser trailer. I think for a teaser trailer, it gets the job done fairly well. It gets you interested in the universe, who these characters are, what their goals are. It is kind of messy in that regard. It's kind of all over the place. It starts with a shot of Blockbuster Video, which the movie takes place in the 90s, so Blockbuster was peaking in the 90s, of course, but you still had that during the 2000s as well. So I don't know. It was a good trailer. I mean, it was fine, I guess. I'm not particularly fond of Brie Larson as an actress. Actually, she's about 2 for 4 in terms of close enough to leading roles. I mean, yeah, she's kind of in an ensemble in Kong and Free Fire, but those were my least favorite performances from her. I thought she was really bad in Kong. Like, she just didn't bring any sort of dramatic depth or any sort of emotion to the character. She's just very bland and very boring. And then in Free Fire, the same way. She just, again, like, I just found her unconvincing, and I think that's kind of my biggest concern. But I do love her in Room. I think she showed a lot of great weight there, and then I also think in Short Term 12 she did a fantastic job. Even though I'm not too head over heels for that movie, I still think it's really good. I think that she's a fine actress, but I don't know. I'm very concerned for her to be a leading lady in this film about a character that is supposedly brainwashed and stuff, but at the same time, if there's still got to be some, I don't know, some dramatic stuff there going on, some weight, some depth to the performance, and I don't know if she's going to be able to bring that. A lot of the line delivery was just very boring and very wooden. So I'm excited because it's a movie that takes place so many years, replaced from a lot of the other cinematic universe events. I'm excited to see the Skrulls. I'm not particularly a fan of the Skrulls. I'm not going to act like I'm a fan of the Skrulls, but I'm excited to see what they bring to the table. And I'm excited for Samuel L. Jackson and Jude Law. They're great performers, and I think that they're going to bring something interesting to the film, and I hope Brie Larson could do the same as well. So that is that for the trailer talk. Now, speaking of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, let's get into our news topic, of which kind of caught just about everybody by surprise last night. So, per IGN and Variety and multiple other media outlets, Loki and Scarlet Witch limited TV series run is going to be happening, or reportedly happening, for their streaming service. I believe it's Disney's streaming service, which opens up the opportunity for other heroes to get their own limited TV series run as well. The episodes will be about 6 to 8 episodes, and the budget for the shows have been described as hefty. So here's the thing. Scarlet Witch is a really cool character, and I think that she deserves her own film. Loki is one of the MCU's best villains, but only in the Thor film, the first Thor film, and then in Avengers he's kind of lame, and then in Thor 2 he kind of, I don't know, he just fakes his death, I guess, and then in Thor Ragnarok they kind of turn him into this lovable little goofball guy that makes anus jokes. So here's the thing. If these shows were about characters that were a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but that we haven't seen before, I wouldn't have an issue. Kind of like Daredevil, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and Jessica Jones. They are characters that aren't really a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't think Kevin Feige had plans for those characters, and Perlmutter, who was there previously, did want that to happen. So now those characters will get their own shows. They're a part of their own little universe that do reference, Iron Man and Thor and like the event from Avengers and stuff like that, right? Here's the problem. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., same thing too, but that is a little bit closer tied in, I guess, although it's not particularly good, and it's kind of all over the place, and Coulson's death is undone. It's just a bizarre film or show. So, of which I watched a couple episodes and I just kind of tuned out. So here's the thing. Loki is the MCU's equivalent to Osama bin Laden, where he is a guy that led an army to commit a terrorist attack on New York and killed hundreds to thousands of people in the process. Loki's a Norse god. Osama bin Laden was a real dude, sure. But his acts were the equivalent of Osama bin Laden's acts, which obviously Osama bin Laden is a enemy of the country, and we killed him back in the day. And, it just, they're trying, whether or not this takes place before or after Infinity War. If it takes place before, it just tells me that they're going to try and get us to sort of empathize and sort of justify Loki's, path to destruction. Which, last night on my post, I made it sound a little more frustrated than I probably actually am. But here's the thing is, you've got this character, you've got this villain, just let him be a villain. I mean, the first Thor film does such a good job of allowing us to empathize and connect with Loki because we understand why he would be frustrated that Odin took him from his true home and didn't really tell him about anything and hid these things from him, and yet he's still going to give Thor the throne and stuff like that. And we understand Loki's emotions and drive and his act of wanting to take over Asgard but doing it in the wrong way. And trying to prove that he was able to defend Asgard for his father and his father rejecting him is a really powerful moment and is a really powerful arc for Loki. It's really, really well done, and it's why it's one of the MCU's best films. Not only that, but juxtaposed to what Thor is doing on Earth is really beautiful. So now what they've done is they've turned Loki, especially in Ragnarok, they've basically tried to turn Loki into this character that is, he's just a lovable goofball guy. He can be a hero. He wants to help save the day, blah, blah, blah. And then in Infinity War, you see that at the beginning as well, where he tries to kill Thanos, and obviously Thanos kills him back. So now, let's talk about that. Let's say this takes place after Infinity War. Listen. If there's any characters that, let's say, let's just say for the sake of hypothetically, after Avengers 4, every character that died comes back. Why would you expect us to want to tune into your universe even more? Obviously the fans are going to be there because the fans believe you can do no wrong, of course. But why would you expect a lot of people just to keep tuning in? You're making, these films that are trying to say, oh, look, we've got all these dramatic stakes and we're killing off people, but yeah, we'll bring them back in a limited TV series run. Okay. What are you doing? Right? If it takes place before Infinity War, it'd be cool to kind of fill in those gaps, and it sounds cool, but you're talking about characters in a cinematic universe, right? So if you believe that you need to give characters more screen time on TV, that tells me that you don't believe you're doing a good enough job with the characters in film to be able to give them enough depth and enough characterization and enough good writing to be able to make them into fully fleshed out characters with believable arcs and journeys. So that you have to give them a 6 to 8 episode run on TV on your streaming service that has to be paid for to be able to fill in those gaps. Because here's the thing. The difference between Daredevil and Iron Fist and stuff like that, and Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, is they aren't tied into the cinematic universe. They're getting their own stories, and all their stuff that they do in their show isn't affecting the cinematic universe, and we don't have to go see those shows to be able to understand the cinematic universe. These other shows with Loki and Scarlet Witch, now you're developing characterization of characters that we might see in future films that might reference things in shows and might be able to say, or characters who see these shows might get a more rewarding experience over people who don't go out and see these things. That's kind of like what Star Wars is doing, but the difference between Star Wars and Marvel is that these characters have been established for for years now, right? So all of a sudden, you have to expect us. I don't have to go pay for TV to be able to see, Star Wars Resistance or whatever. I didn't have to go pay to see Star Wars Rebels. It's on TV, right? It's on cable, right? So here's the thing. All of a sudden, you've got Scarlet Witch and you've got Loki, and then they're probably going to do Hawkeye because they don't believe he can lead a film, and that's eventually probably where they're going to put Black Widow as well, right? So now you're giving them stories and arcs about cinematic universe characters. The stuff that they're going to be doing there, even if they say it's not directly tied into any specific film or series of films, what they're doing is they're characterizing them. They're giving them depth. They're giving them layers. Stuff that the films should be doing, because that's what the majority of people are seeing from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And believe it or not, I know tons of people that don't actively seek out all of these films. I know tons of people that don't care for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I know tons of people that do see the films that won't seek out stuff like this. We're all in our little circle, and it sounds like everybody sees these movies, but the reason these movies make so much money, and the reason why it seems like they're talked about so much, is because the same people are seeing these things over and over and over again. Right? Because, again, I know I'm just one person, but I know at least 50 to 100 people now that don't see these films. And I'm always shocked, because I thought everybody saw them. But they don't. So, listen, if you're a fan, you're going to be excited. If you're someone like me, you're probably not going to be excited. But to me, I'm going to keep seeing the films. I'm going to write a review about them, and I'm just going to not talk about them because, well, I mean, sometimes I like them, but even if you like them, it's apparently not enough for people. And I want to care about these movies, and I want to be as big a fan as everyone else. But to me, they're doing everything they can to turn this into like this big epic serialized TV show, drama, blah, blah, blah. And to me, I'm reading a comment later about the discussion topic that nails it. But these are movies. And you're talking about characters that are directly tied to the cinematic universe. And you're creating a streaming service and episodes about characters that are going to directly affect what we're seeing on screen in future films. So that's all I have to say about that. Now for the discussion topic of the week. This should take about 15 to 20 minutes, possibly sort of like a homily at your local church on a Sunday morning. So, our discussion topic of the week: how do we feel about cinematic universes? Anything ranging between X-Men to the Dark Universe. And let's just start with the X-Men universe, a universe that is really kind of a mess, especially right now, especially with 20th Century Fox being unfortunately purchased by Disney. Hopefully something comes up to where that just stops happening. They obviously have the rights now, and they have to go through like one more step, and it's theirs. And yay, the X-Men are back, but it's okay. Hundreds to thousands of people lose their jobs, and not to mention that a lot of creative control is going to Disney over films, when a lot of other studios can have creative control as well, so that we can keep getting a diverse set of films. But oh well, who cares? The X-Men and Fantastic Four are back, baby. So X-Men, listen, a lot of their films, they don't really follow the timeline. A lot of them just kind of exist just to exist. And it's why it's one of my favorite cinematic universes, especially in regards to superhero universes, because they are films that lightly and loosely follow like the set timeline, but they kind of ignore it in some instances as well. But they just allow their director to have creative control over the product. So that just means that when I'm watching the film, I'm probably getting at least pretty good film. Listen, the only one of the only ones in the franchise that I think is relatively and truly awful is X-Men Origins Wolverine. X-Men 3 is not that bad. I think it's actually just quite mediocre, like a 2 out of 5. I mean, obviously not good or anything, but a lot of people talk about it like, it's like the worst superhero movie of all time, when there's, to me, far worse. It's kind of like Spider-Man 3 for me, where these films they don't tap into their full potential, but they're still quite enjoyable overall. I haven't seen X-Men 3 in a long time, so maybe I'll have to, update my senses and update my opinion. But so X-Men, it's a universe that I think has done everything that, well, what these universes should do. I think that what the problem is for general audiences and for a lot of comic book movie fans is they anticipate everything to be connected and everything to connect to this and everything to connect to that. And to me, it's just impossible. I mean, you're talking about a set of films that are roughly run about 2 to 2.5 hours, or an hour and 50 minutes to 2.5 hours, roughly, give or take a few minutes. And they have to get a lot of information in there. And a lot of the times, when we're going to get to the Amazing Spider-Man 2 here in a second, is they try and set up future films, and it compromises the film that they're on. And that's a problem. And to me, I'm just going to preface everything else I'm about to say with, I think cinematic universes are an issue. And I think that cinematic universes are causing a problem with these comic book movie films. And it's why I prefer the other ones that don't exactly, yeah, they tell their own story and are a part of a cinematic universe, but at least they have some sort of, it doesn't feel like an assembly line. Like these films have to, oh, we did this other film here and it's going to follow that exactly like that. I'll get into that in a minute with the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well. But anyways, I don't like cinematic universes. I think they're a problem. I think they need to go away. The Dark Universe is one of the more recent ones. Here's the biggest con to a Marvel cinematic, to a cinematic universe in general. If you are starting a cinematic universe and you are just going to lay all this information out there for future projects and not focus on your film at hand, you're going to fail, and that's what the Dark Universe did. I will never forget when I was sitting in the theater for The Mummy last year, and all of a sudden, the Universal logo rolled around and it said The Dark Universe. You are talking about the utmost confidence that you believe in your project. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that you focused on creating the universe before you allowed us to be able to reside in that universe for at least a film. Iron Man is a perfect example of starting a cinematic universe. You gave us a story about a character. You gave us an arc, a beginning, middle, and end to this specific portion of his journey. In that process, you gave us Easter eggs to S.H.I.E.L.D. You gave us Easter eggs to the Avengers at the very end. You gave us Easter eggs for future Iron Man suits and Iron Man stories. That is how you start a cinematic universe. In the same way, Man of Steel, to me, was also a great start to a cinematic universe. You gave us a story with a beginning, middle, and end about Superman. Within that, you gave us Easter eggs about other possible, roadways into other things you can do into the cinematic universe, while also setting up future projects without dedicating, minutes of time, like 10 minutes of time just to set it up. That's Man of Steel and Iron Man is how you start a cinematic universe. I mean, listen, not a lot of people love Man of Steel, I understand that. But at the same time, they did exactly they took the right steps. And I think that's great. Okay? Other films, obviously Batman v Superman dedicates a lot of time to setting up future stories. It's my least favorite parts of an otherwise fantastic movie. Iron Man 2 does the same thing. It just spends a lot of time setting up universe when it can just tell its own story. Talk about what's going on with Tony, Nick Fury. Create some parallels here. Do something. That's why it's one of the worst MCU movies, because it's just a mess and it's really boring, right? And the main story, the main narrative is really uninteresting. So back to the Dark Universe, that's what the Dark Universe did. They did exactly what you're not supposed to do. That's the perfect example. You're creating this film that isn't, it's kind of just exists. It's something that, it wants to do something, but it doesn't know how to do it. And cinematic universes, the Marvel Cinematic Universe specifically, changed the industry. That can't be ignored. It single-handedly changed the way that these blockbusters exist. It paved the way for what Star Wars is doing. It paved the way for Fast and Furious to go the way that it did. And in actuality, Fast and Furious is the first team-up movie before Avengers. That movie had a cinematic universe before the Avengers did, right? And that's really interesting, and that's really cool. Not saying that Avengers was inspired by Fast and Furious, but, Fast and Furious did it as well, and they've done it really well for a lot of its fan base. I don't particularly love the films, but, I like a couple of them, and I think that it's really cool that they were able to team up with characters from other films, and they meet for the first time, and they have their own specific interactions, like Han and Giselle, Gal Gadot's character. They, fall in love or whatever, and they eventually die in the sixth one or whatever. Spoiler alert. But, it's really cool that we're able to get stuff like that. And I think that's one of the greatest things to come from a cinematic universe, is being able to tell this overarching story with specific storylines that enhance the overall narrative between, because the Fast and Furious films are about family. And all of the Fast and Furious films leading up to like their big team up films in 5, 6, 7, and 8 is that, it's about family. And I think that's really cool. And that it might not work for a lot of people, which it hasn't, but that's awesome. And I think that's, if you're going to do a cinematic universe, is do it like that and be self-aware of what type of franchise you are. Marvel Cinematic Universe does it less so, but they're a little bit more ambitious, a little bit larger scale, right? Although I don't see any Avengers, turning around missiles and launching them at submarines, or launching cars from building to building because a missile hit the back of a car and at some reason propelled the car forward. Whatever, you get the point. But Marvel, what they do is they appeal to the largest common denominator. To me, they don't have any interest in making films like a Zack Snyder film or an Alfonso Cuarón film or an Edgar Wright film, as signaled by the fact that they released him from the Ant-Man project because of creative differences back in the day. So the difference with Marvel in Fast and Furious is this is going to sound like an insult, but it's not. The Marvel Cinematic Universe accomplishes what they do and is as big as they are because they do the least amount of work possible. Again, that sounds like an insult, but here's why it isn't. Marvel, what they do is they have an outlook for the next 5 to 6 films that they're going to be releasing. It used to be 4 when they were releasing 2 a year. Notice how they don't really go anywhere beyond like 2 years into the future. Maybe they talk about them, but they don't really solidify anything about relatively the next 3 to 6 films, okay? So when we get these films, what they do is they never had this plan from day one. They had no idea they were going to be doing a Captain Marvel film set in the 90s, back when they made Iron Man. They had no idea they were going to be doing Guardians of the Galaxy when they made Iron Man. And to be honest, I don't think that they were fully convinced they were going to... Maybe they did plan Infinity War, and that was kind of the end game. But I don't think they really planned it out quite well. And I think that what they did and what they are doing, and here's what I see every time I look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe in regards to doing the least amount of work possible. What they do is they give us a couple films, okay? And they set up and they create this story and these specific stories and say, here's that story for Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, right? And Iron Man 2, and Incredible Hulk. So they create these pocket stories, right? And then what they do is when they create sequels or team-up films, all they have to do is say, let's connect the dots from the previous films. They don't have all of this planned as much as we like to think so. What they do is they say, here's what we did in Incredible Hulk. Here's how we can't contradict that. And here's how we have to do this. Here's what we set up in this film. Here's how we're going to pay it off here. Here's what we're going to continue. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's impossible to just plan all meticulously and precisely and calculated. It's just very, very difficult. And it's a harrowing task. We like to think that Marvel does that, but they really don't. And that's because when you look at their films, they're limiting their directors' voices. Again, which isn't entirely an insult. It's just a fact of the matter. A lot of people say, oh, well, it's not really limited. It's not like they're made by Marvel, blah, 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 which I would beg to differ personally. But, they're not really that limited. Look at the James Gunn films. And I would agree that the Guardians films are the most creative of all of them, right? And they have the most of a director's cinematic language implemented into them, despite the fact that they're just okay at best. And in Guardians 2 case, not very good at all. But you're still, when you have a cinematic universe, you are limiting a director's vision. And you're limiting the director's vision because you're telling them, here, we're going to assign you to this project. But you have to follow the parameters of which we've already previously set. And to me, that kills a lot of what I love about movies. Being able to see these diverse voices and being able to see some sort of cinematic language implemented into their films to talk about something greater and personal and touching in their lives. Again, the James Gunn Guardian films fall under that umbrella. Right? But with a lot of these other films like Civil War, I couldn't tell you anything about the Russos as directors. I couldn't tell you anything about Peyton Reed as a director just based off of the Ant-Man films. I couldn't tell you a single thing about John Watts, and I couldn't tell you a single thing about what's another mediocre film? Thor 2, Alan Taylor, right? So what they do is they limit these directors' creative capabilities to be able to say, here, you can tell this story, you can write the script, and you can direct it, blah, blah, blah. Maybe someone else will write the script. But those scripts have to follow something the previous film already set up, and you can't contradict one another. Because people, I'm going to read a comment later from Tristan that basically says they take this so seriously. And it's why, again, I love the X-Men film so much. Do they contradict some things? Yes, but they still allow creative vision and control to be able to tell stories about these superheroes with some sort of cinematic language in them. And that's what I cherish as a film goer, and that's why I hate cinematic universes. That's why I thought the DC Cinematic Universe had a really good thing going for them. They had Zack Snyder, one of the most creative directors this side of the 2000s has ever seen. Yes, his films didn't work for a lot of people. Yes, his style is very unique. Yes, there is substance within style, a future discussion topic, don't worry. But, he went out and created his Man of Steel movie that he always envisioned and his Batman v Superman movie that he always envisioned. And then, things went off the rails and it was a little more studio mandated and stuff like that. And that, to me, is an issue because these studios think that everything has to be explained. Everything has to be so tightly put together. And to me, that's an issue. Why don't you want, your films to be kind of what film was always intended to be? Not that that's necessarily true, because film still is very young. It's only about 100 years old compared to, how we truly know them now. Film was a little bit different in the early 1900s and late 1800s. But cinematic universes, to me, they just cause problems for films. And to me, it limits creative control. It limits everything I love about films. And I think that when you're looking at the Marvel Cinematic Universe as this, the example, I don't think studios should follow that example. There's no right way to do anything, and the way they're doing it now is by doing the least amount of work possible, and that's why they're so successful. And that's why people love them. Listen, I watched Iron Man in the break room the other day, and there's a line where Tony is reaching into Obadiah Stane's suit at the end of the film, and he says, "This looks important." And then in Ant-Man in Civil War, when he's inside Tony's suit, he rips apart something that says, "This looks important." Because they reference things. They don't have that pre-planned. They just tie things together like that. And that's just, to me, just a tiny example, and that might not give enough credence to my argument here. But at the same time, these universes, you set up Thanos in Avengers in the post-credit scene, and you didn't do anything with him over the course of 6 whole years of films. With 2 films a year. Why? Because they had to make sure that they were creating films that directly tied into the film previous, and to make sure they didn't contradict anything. And to me, they're not as clean cut as we think they are. And they're a cinematic universe that is successful because they do the least amount of work possible. And that's just my thoughts on that. It's why I love the Spider-Man Raimi films so much. Because they are films that is Sam Raimi's trilogy with his style, his creative control, that is in his own universe, that is directly about Spider-Man, to create thematic resonance, to create depth, to focus on character, and focus on his journey from Spider-Man 1 to Spider-Man 3 and what was supposed to be Spider-Man 4. And I think comic book movies have fallen into this weird shaft where they now have to all be a part of a cinematic universe, and it's a shame. And now other universes are trying to do it. Let's make everything interconnected. DC and Universal and Fast and Furious and Star Wars. Don't even get me started on Star Wars. These movies are better off not being interconnected, because they're way too ridiculous, and because they feel like everyone needs to be as calculated and precise, quote unquote, as Marvel. And I think that's a problem. And hopefully they go away one day, but to me, just focus on telling stories. Singular stories about characters. If you want to integrate other characters, that's fine. But the biggest problem with Infinity War is that there's not enough movie for the stuff that they want to talk about in that movie. and the stuff that they want to accomplish. It's as good as it could have been. It's 2.5 hours, and it somehow needed to be longer because other movies didn't do a good enough job of setting up Infinity War to pave the way for a more seamless runtime, seamless sequences, and not have to spend time constantly dishing out exposition for an hour and a half. And that's just my thoughts on that. So I'm going to read some comments now. Dan Purcell, always delivering the goods in regards to commenting on my posts. Dan Purcell says, when I asked them to give me a pro and a con, what are the pros to cinematic universes? What are the cons? Because there's really pros and cons to everything, but specifically for cinematic universe, because there are pros and there are cons, as I mentioned previously. Dan says, pro, consistently unified sequential storytelling. When at its best, these films are like wrestling. You devote a great deal of time to characters, themes, and concepts, so moments that acknowledge the history and the stories pay off emotionally for you. Perfect answer. Con, film isn't really the right medium for this. It's hard to fit that kind of storytelling in a medium that only allots you a max of 2.5 hours per film. Now, that's easy to do as a one-off creative statement. As an example, Toy Story, Star Wars, and The Dark Knight are great examples that come to mind of episodic blockbuster media that crafts an overarching story that truly delivers. Based on your taste in film, you could agree or disagree with me here. I find it super challenging, though, to keep that momentum sustained for more than 3 films, if not just 3 films. There's a reason why we don't talk so much about Game of Thrones fatigue and are more invested in conversations such as superhero movie fatigue. Television, and to a larger extent online media like vlogs and YouTube films, just fundamentally works better in telling an ongoing sequential story that requires you to learn about and watch characters grow and develop over long periods of time. And Dan, you're right. I mean, it's just superhero movie fatigue isn't really something I want to dive into right now because I can spend another 10 minutes talking about it, but I have superhero movie fatigue. I'm tired of seeing 6 films a year about same things, sky beams, and none of these films having enough creative control over them to make it feel different from the last. So that's that. Basically, superhero movie fatigue summed up for me. And a lot of other people I know as well. Michael K, always delivering the goods as well. This one's kind of easy, but since I'm at work, I might come back for a longer answer. Pros. A giant sandbox for fans, creators to have fun on set. On the business side, when done right, you have a franchise that lasts a decade minimum. Con, when done wrong, things can get convoluted, creators have their hands tied, and if the first entry fails to stand alone, you don't have a leg to stand on. So basically, Michael covered all bases for a lot of the cinematic universes here, particularly in the cons. When done wrong, things can get convoluted. Kind of like Batman v Superman in the DC Cinematic Universe. Creators can have their hands tied. He kind of talks about the Marvel Cinematic Universe here and, losing some directors like Patty Jenkins, Ava DuVernay, and Edgar Wright because some creators don't want their hands tied. And if the first entry fails to stand alone, you don't have a leg to stand on. That's directly about the Dark Universe, where the Mummy is just kind of a mess and really doesn't set up anything for the future and why it's never going to exist. But on the business side, you do have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who is successful and has lasted a decade minimum with a whopping 22 films in 10 years. Insane. So CJ Backus, I think it's my first time ever saying your last name out loud, and I think I pronounced it properly. He said, I like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I also feel that the cinematic universe as a creative and business endeavor is a pox upon the film industry. They can be exciting and fun and come close to great, but the films don't really serve themselves. They serve the universe. There's a reason only one of them works, and on top of that, the model has so fundamentally changed the way movies are made and packaged that, while I enjoy some to most of these movies, it's more of a hindrance on the future of filmmaking than a boon. Which is an incredible comment. And it's the Amazing Spider-Man 2 syndrome, where you've got a film that is so interested in setting up future films, it doesn't even want to focus on the fact that it's got to tell a story about Peter and Gwen in their film. And he's right, there's a reason only one of these works. And I think the reason it works is because they do the least amount of work possible, because they don't pre-plan for the future. They don't try and, meticulously craft out everything and calculate everything, because they're working too hard. That's the problem. That's why the Amazing Spider-Man films failed, is because they worked too hard for the amount of work you actually have to do. If you only have to, why do you have to work so hard to do something? Just do what Marvel does, guys. Just do the least amount of work possible. Create a film, talk about a story, and then try and expand the universe and doing the least amount of work possible in the next film. And then in your big team up film, just lay everything out on the table as if you set that up, but you actually didn't. Anyways, Moving on to Tristan Mayer's final comment, which is a long one, but it's a doozy, and in boy oh boy does he nail it. Tristan Mayer, Pro. Cinematic universes are a fun puzzle for fans to put together. I'll always remember those first years of the MCU and trying to scrape up any bits of information from the screen. It really built a fun community in the early days of social media. And when that scraping of info and theories finally came together in Avengers, that moment was undeniably satisfying for me. And for millions of others as well. Cons. Storytelling starts to limit itself. Every movie within the universe is judged not on its quality, but on how it connected to the universe. Part of this falls on fans being let down by something that doesn't directly connect perfectly, but a lot of it is on studios who market all these movies as episodes of a TV show, quote unquote. This also limits the risk an individual movie can take. I think Winter Soldier is a good example of this. When they revealed S.H.I.E.L.D. as Hydra, it felt big and risky in the moment as an exciting shakeup to the MCU, but when you look back on it now, what has really changed? S.H.I.E.L.D. functions pretty much exactly how it used to, and the characters have faced no real consequences for it. Thanos could have been their long-running arc, but he's barely present even in the few movies he's in. If cinematic universes really want to last as the TV of movies, they need to be planned out in more detail. The writers behind the best TV shows don't just make episodes up as they go along. And he nails it. He definitely does, because especially regarding, just ramifications for the universe. I think one of the reasons the Marvel universe hasn't worked as well for me is because I feel like there's nothing in them that has really affected the world of the universe. And the world is more important than the characters. And to me, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has prioritized characters over world. Right? And I think that's a problem. I think that when you're creating a world, right? I'm going to use Paul Thomas Anderson here as an example because I think he's the best at it. He creates worlds that are really interesting. He creates worlds like There Will Be Blood, these larger-than-life universes where there's betrayal, backstabbing, and it's directly about a lot of American economics, right? You have a film like Phantom Thread. He establishes a 1950s era film in Phantom Thread where, you've got this larger-than-life universe where this guy is great at making dresses for people and people love him, and he's a very prestigious house, right? And he establishes that. So the world is larger than life. But what he does is he creates characters in stories and journeys that are intimate, thus amplifying the world and making that radius from the center of that world, the characters, the radius to the world extend larger and farther. And that, to me, is how great filmmaking is done. Paul Thomas Anderson style. And I think if cinematic universes took that approach, specifically the Marvel Cinematic Universe, their cinematic universe would be even better. Because when you look at some of the things that have happened in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, particularly what he mentioned, when that does happen in Winter Soldier, that is an incredible twist. Oh my God. Hydra's infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. What are they ever going to do? Blah, blah, blah. But now when you look at the lasting ramifications, what has really happened since then? They haven't really touched on it in 4 years. It's something that's barely been talked about. And then all of a sudden, some people are like, oh yeah, well, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is showing that. But that is what we're saying. That is why I have an issue with Loki and Scarlet Witch having their own little limited run. Well, if you watch this, you'll understand. I shouldn't have to do that. Here's the key word in Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's right in between Marvel and Universe. It's cinematic. If you're the cinematic universe, I shouldn't have to go touch on TV and subscribe to your streaming service to be able to watch your shows and be able to digest all your content to be able to create a more fulfilling, fully colored in picture. You have to connect the dots for me because I'm the audience member. You have to work with us, not around us. And I hope that makes sense. And I think it makes sense. But these cinematic universes, not just Marvel in general here, what they're doing is they're trying to create so much content, so many streaming services, because Netflix changed the game there, that we apparently have to digest more content to be able to get a better, more filled in picture. And to me, that is anti-film. And I know that sounds pretentious. I know that sounds ridiculous. But to me, it's a problem. And it's something that can and hopefully will be fixed. Because It's frustrating. Just tell stories. Just tell your stories. Can we please get rid of the cinematic universe model? It's causing problems. Contracts, CGI mustaches, all this stuff. Contradictions, not being able to fulfill arcs. Looking at a movie like Thor Ragnarok to Thor the Dark World. Thor Ragnarok fundamentally changes so much about characters, it doesn't even make sense. In fact, it is a story that is the exact replica of the first Thor film, but everyone loves it more because it's funnier. Just tell stories. Get a director to tell a story but across 3 to 4 films and just end it. Because then we can have great comic book films with characters at the center of that world, expand that world, and allow us to resonate with it more because their arcs are so fulfilling. And that's why the Spider-Man trilogy and the Dark Knight trilogy are the best that the comic book movie genre will have to offer us. Thank you guys for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Obviously, I'm just one person. I have my own opinion. I love to hear what everyone else has to think, as long as it is done in a constructive and relatively intelligent manner. So thank you guys for listening once again. Go ahead and leave a comment down below of letting me know what you thought about the video. Also, if you have the time, make sure you subscribe to the Talon Brothers podcast on YouTube. A couple buddies of mine talk about film every week on there, and it lasts about an hour to hour and 20 minutes. It's a good listen. Also, my girlfriend's podcast on SoundCloud, What Do I Know with Joe, where she talks about something that is going on in her life that you can probably relate to bi-weekly. It is a great 5 to 10 minute listen. Easy breezy, lemon squeezy. So thank you guys for listening. This is the 20th episode. I can't believe it. And I'm down for another 200 more. So I'll see you next week. Keep on watching some films. I'm going to be checking out A House with a Clock in Its Walls and A Simple Favor tomorrow. Keep on watching film, guys, and let me know what you think about cinematic universes. Have a wonderful rest of your week.